Good morning, Daily Dosers. Today we find ourselves in chapter 4 of Philippians. We're getting close to the end as he gives his final encouragement and exhortation. We pick up in verse 4. And in verse 4 of Philippians 4, it says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." It's a very simple exhortation to just rejoice. If we've been going through Philippians, we've seen over and over again reasons and mindsets and attitudes that we should have to be like Christ. And in this one, the idea of rejoicing comes up. And sometimes for some of us, it may not be so easy to rejoice. That we may be in a life stage or a trial or something where rejoice is not a natural outflow of us. But he says in here, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say rejoice. And this puts into perspective this, I think, a story that my wife was sharing with me. We were talking about this verse last night, and she reminded us of a missions trip we took to Africa one time. And while we were there in Kenya, we had an opportunity to go into one of the IDP camps, the internationally displaced persons. It's people who have had to flee another country, but they can't really merge into the culture there in Kenya. And so they built a kind of a compound that eventually turns into just a holding place. People end up staying there too long, and years go by, and now you have poverty and crime and disease, and it turns into what now people just call a slum. And as we were giving a tour there, I remember peeking through a window at these kids in this one orphanage that we had navigated our way into the heart of the slum. Under kind of guard protection. Some locals had taken us back there to make sure that we were safe. And I looked through this window, and I remember seeing this lineup of kids, 50, 60 little kids who were orphans. They're living in this environment that's total depravity, that's running toilets through the street and crime. And the whole city, in a sense, had been built off the trash of another city. And you look around, and my wife said she remembers feeling this hopelessness. She remembers looking at these kids in this big metal pot on a stove, and that's the food they had for the day, the one meal that they're going to eat. And just seeing all these kids and going, what hope can they have? And the gift of empathy that my wife has said, I can't fathom what the point is for these kids. Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? Is this their lot in life? It's not the glamorized Aladdin street rat running around grabbing an apple off the cart from here and there. This is nothingness, and they're living in this day by day. And then as we were walking back out, one of the guards who was there was walking, and different groups had broken off, and I was walking with one of the leaders. My wife had an opportunity to talk to the guard, and he was she still remembers how he would just kind of grab her shoulder and pull her this way and push her that way as she navigated the streets. And she asked him, he was sharing the gospel with him, and just so joyful, she remembers. And she said, so where do you live? Do you live in the city? Do you work, with the organization? He goes, no, I live here. And she goes, what do you mean, here? Like in the IDP camp? He goes, yeah, I was one of those orphan kids. And it struck her so harshly. She kind of did this, like a knife in the heart when she was telling the story to me, that it changed her perspective. She goes, this was one of those kids who I thought couldn't find hope in this situation. And yet he had found it, and he had found it in Christ. And the joy that this kid had, the hope that this kid had, he had found a way out. He had found love and joy, and had to the point that he was sharing it with her. We're there as Christians coming to help them, and he's telling her about the gospel of Christ, and he found this peace and this hope. And as I go back into this verse, it says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I think that's what my wife encountered, and I was reminded of, is that when we have this true hope of Christ, that there's a peace that comes with it. There's a hope in it, and that we can live a life of thanksgiving. And I think my prayer request would have been drastically different than this guards who was walking with us on a day-to-day basis. As I make my prayer and supplication made known to God, I was probably asking for drastically different things. And it helped put me in the right focus of going, what is my base need? What is it that I ask of God with thanksgiving? Out of an overflow of what he's done for me. And this guy showed us what true joy was as a life surrendered to Christ and wanted to share it with others. And so we all can have joy and hope, no matter what the circumstances we're in. So take heart, no matter what your situation is, and have a right mindset that we can have peace in God no matter what. Have a great day, Daily Dosers.